Hi there, this is Leonard Kish. I am a co-founder of Ubase that's working on some blockchain technology for healthcare. And I'm excited here on Health IT TV to talk with Adrian Gropper, a longtime patient advocate, and who's really been working for as long as I've known you, for more than 5 years now, with probably a whole career on how to drive technologies behind Health IT towards a more patient-centric future. So Adrian, you're the Chief Privacy Officer at the Privacy Rights Foundation, and you've been working on a project called HIE of One now for over a year now, I think. So tell us a little bit about Privacy Rights Foundation and HIE of One. And
First of all, I'm the Chief Technology Officer. Somebody else made me Chief Privacy Officer.
Oh, on the healthcare board. Okay.
Second of all, it's Patient Privacy Rights Foundation. And yes, I have been CTO there for about 4 or 5 years now. The main thing that I'm working on and have been working on is enabling patient-centered longitudinal health records. This is elusive by any means. It has actually come much more to the fore in the last few months and recently as people struggle with sustainability of HIEs and huge amounts of frustration with EHRs on the part of both physicians and patients. The thought of a different model, a longitudinal patient-centered model, is now, was certainly raised by Karen DeSalvo this summer in the meetings in Washington, their big meetings. It's also in the 21st Century Cures Bill, the term longitudinal health records and access to that. So if that passes, it'll actually become law. And to bring you to the present day, I believe, and I haven't seen anybody correct me, that right now our HIE of One project, which is a free software reference implementation, it's not a commercial thing, but it's a proof of concept, if you want to think of it, is the only example of a standards-based patient-centered health record that anybody knows of. Many people have claimed and might claim a patient-centered health record, but what we're doing with HIE of One is trying to do it as close to the FHIR and HEART and identity management standards, including the blockchain stuff, as anybody.
So before we go there, let's take a step back. So it's one of the big problems in healthcare, of course, is that our data is distributed among a lot of different third parties, from claims to EHRs to stuff we're collecting ourselves to prescriptions. So how does HIE of One really go from these third parties, and if you look at Bitcoin and blockchain as kind of disintermediating third parties to enable exchange, how do you apply the blockchain technology to HIE of One and making it, I presume, third party independent?
Well, the problem is identity. The major problem, not just patient ID matching, which is just completely unworkable. And we can go into details about how the various, but let me take this in 2 steps. First of all, you're right, the data is scattered, and for all sorts of good reasons, it ought to stay where it is, rather than trying to collect all of it into one honeypot. And that's for provenance reasons. That's because if you move the data, the doctors don't trust it, don't use it. And this has been shown by Microsoft and Google and pretty much a long list of companies, including mine, my previous one, a long time ago, that have tried to do this. So the reason we call it HIE of One is because it is an HIE. But in other words, it does not require that the stuff be moved to a central place from the scattered places.
So it stays where it's at, and you just point to it and can access it and pull it as needed?
Yeah, this is what HIEs, most HIEs do, also what Commonwealth, for example, is set up to do. They're basically brokers. based on API access to wherever the data is. So HIE of One, again, and that's the reason I'm gonna keep coming back to standards every step of the way, including blockchain standards as we talk, is because standards are important for two reasons. Number one, they're important in order to get the data via APIs. Document-based exchange is also an experiment that has failed, and it's not useful to create a clinically useful longitudinal health record. And we can go into why, but that's a separate issue. And the other I lost my train of thought, but has to do, the other aspect of standards, yes, sorry, standards, is that, you know, you can't expect people to use 100 different kinds of patient-centered health records for, you know, the million patients in a region, let's say. They would go crazy. So the way a patient presents has to be relatively standardized if you expect EHRs or practice systems or other clinical uses to happen. So in other words, you need standards on the way in and you need standards on the way out if you're going to have a patient in the middle.
So how does so you're using blockchain for identity standards, and that's where you're starting?
Yes. Well, yes, because the problem, the unsolved problem for HIEs are basically consent management. You can imagine, and people think of it as being patient matching, but I think that's actually not the case. Patient matching is relevant in a situation where you have involuntary surveillance, you know, coercive, like law enforcement. You know, if you want to know everything about somebody who might become a terrorist, and you're going to build those kind of databases, and people do. That's, you know, law enforcement tries to match people, and if they make a mistake, well, you know, they'll sort it out in court, or they'll sort it out when the officer gets to your house. In healthcare, probabilistic matching has not worked, and the reason is that if you make too many mistakes, people will opt out. You don't have a you know, whether you have opt-in or opt-out as the foundation of an HIE mechanism, both under HIPAA and just under common sense, you cannot scale these things, and you cannot build on the foundation of coercive or probabilistic matching.
Right.
You have to build on top of consent. And that's why we don't have patient matching problems in banking or in sharing your educational credentials or in any other domain. It's because that kind of data sharing and that kind of identity management is voluntary. It's open. You connect your bank accounts. You connect your merchants. You connect your social networks.
The individual is more at the center of the process.
What?
The individual is more at the center of the process.
Yeah, it's a voluntary process. It's not just that they're at the center. It's that it's voluntary. It's transparent. Whereas patient matching using MPIs, probabilistic things, and things like that, no matter how you slice it, it's a coercive and hidden process.
Right.
So what's interesting about the blockchain identity technology, which we're already demonstrating, it's not part of the HIE of One demo. It's a separate server because we haven't merged it in, but we are using already the UPort, the Ethereum-based UPort passwordless login, biometric login. Basically, I can demo it if we move the camera around, actually. That would take a little bit of fiddling, and I don't know if you want to do that on live video, but I can actually show you that. And what's interesting about that is that it's obviously two-factor. It's biometrically linked. It looks a lot like Apple Pay, except you're using an app dedicated to blockchain login, and it's based on a standard as well. So there are other, you may have heard of an outfit called Sovereign. That's a startup that's using a permissioned public blockchain. There's also Blockstack, which is the original one. You may have heard of it as OneName.
Yep.
So all three of these methods, plus another one called Bitcoin One, that's not a commercial effort, all three of these efforts are being standardized by our work in something called Rebooting Web of Trust. And that means that we're not going to have, for blockchain ID, not only is it going to be very secure and passwordless and decentralized, but you're not going to have the NASCAR situation where you're being asked, log in with Google, log in with Facebook, log in with Twitter everywhere you go. So not only, so there's no federation here at all. All you're doing is logging in with a blockchain identity standard called DID for decentralized identity. And that's being worked on by all of these blockchain identity vendors. Again, we could send around references or people can contact me. But yes, so there you go on consent and identity management.
So how does that, I don't think we need to go into the demo, but how does that, so underneath all this, there's public and private keys. And so you're logging in with your biometrics and a key, or, and I know with Blockstack, you know, it uses your different social profiles to prove who you are and your relationship to those keys. So can you go into a little bit more about how that works, or how the user experience is going to be like?
Yes. The experience is that you have an app. In the experience we're demoing now, you have an app which is called the Uport app. It's in private beta right now. It will be in public beta probably by the end of the year or thereabouts. And the app stores your private key, creates and stores your private key. So it's non-repudiable. It's in the secure element of the phone, linked to the fingerprint, and linked to one smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain, which represents your lifelong ID, you know, for 100 years. There is another smart contract that actually controls how this identity is used. And that smart contract has the recoverability mechanisms in case your phone is stolen or your private key is otherwise compromised. You have basically an M of N recovery situation, just like you have in Bitcoin with multisig. So you have this idea that when you create this biometrically linked private key in your iPhone, then you also get to pick 5 friends or whatever you want, any 3 of which, for example, can be used to recover your control. So to summarize, it's 2 linked smart contracts in the Uport. The Sovereign is using a slightly different method, but it's basically the same thing, as is Blockstack. And you're always controlling a sovereign private key.
And you call this in your white paper self-sovereign identity.
Yes.
And those are all examples.
Sovereign identity. So you're right. Yes. Not just me. That's what people call it.
Okay. So the idea is you control your identity independent. You use these third parties, but it's all based on open standards and open IDs. So really, no matter what happens, you're in control of this identity and this Go ahead.
Interestingly enough, your group, whatever the group you chose, is actually in control of your identity. And you want it that way because you need the recovery mechanisms. It's very hard to have non-repudiable identity, and you need non-repudiable identity, for instance, to pick up an opioid prescription, right? Or if you're a doctor, in our system, the doctors get to use HIE of One, obviously, as well as the patients, and they get to use the patient-centered EHR that we're showing. And so they need non-repudiable IDs. And non-repudiable IDs are like what your passport or your driver's license is. It's an identity that cannot be denied in court and therefore could put you in jail. So these systems have that characteristic of being non-repudiable based on, and then the reputational component is the blockchain for all of them.
So what you know and who you know, and verifiability.
No, I mean, you're still the only one that has control of the private key, but the recovery mechanism is your cohort, and there are time locks in there to make sure that that doesn't get hacked. It's kind of interesting security-wise. And what I'm saying is that there are going to be many different blockchains, because no blockchain is going to last the lifetime of a person. And we see blockchains come and go, I mean, you know, every few years. And there's no need, when it comes to identity, to use a single blockchain. It's actually, and we're already seeing projects like, for instance, the ones that do timestamping standards, which is also being standardized. If you're going to go and timestamp things for authenticity, you don't necessarily care. You only care about the cost and how time accurate, you know, whether it's to a day, an hour, or a second that the timestamp is. And so depending on how much you're willing to pay to have a timestamp, to have that escrow function, you might be using 3 separate blockchains, because it really doesn't matter. It's going to be the difference between 1/10 of a cent and 3/10 of a cent. Let's say if you're willing to tolerate the 2-hour window in the accuracy of the timestamp. So people are standardizing that aspect of blockchain users, and we will use that as well. And then we're also using standards around verifiable claims, because just because you have a non-repudiable ID doesn't mean that the doctor can convince you that he has a license in Massachusetts. And so we're working with the medical societies and and the government. I was just in Washington last couple of days to make sure that the physician directory components are also standardized in a way that's compatible with this blockchain ID for physicians.
So how do you see this rolling out then? I mean, you know, this is kind of nipping around the edges.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I wrote about that at the end of this One Regulation post in the healthcare blog.
Talked about the sustainability model a little bit. So what is the sustainability model?
I think it's a sort of 2-part question. I don't really have a good answer, but I can tell you what I'm hoping for. Number one, I think long-term, the physicians who are writing the orders, who are spending the $3 trillion in the healthcare system, are going to have to want to do this for their patient's sake and for their own sake. They're going to want to take control of the physician-patient relationship, just like they had in the days of paper prescriptions and paper health records. You know, the world worked perfectly fine with paper prescriptions. The patients actually had the freedom to shop around, which they've sort of lost with the digital world. The physicians didn't have to involve an EHR vendor or a hospital in order to do their job. And, you know, things worked much more efficiently from the healthcare system, you know, just a physician productivity point of view. So, but, you know, physicians don't change their practices quickly, and the software for them to do, to manage their responsibilities, both in terms of patient care and their legal responsibilities, are going to have to evolve away from this one EHR to rule them all model that we've gotten over the last 7 years. So that's the long-term thing. In the short term, I think this is going to happen one niche at a time. So for instance, people talk to me about psychiatry, or maybe people will do this because there's a particular pharmaceutical that's very expensive and they need to show value-based benefits that are tied, that require the kind of data that really does require an HIE that works, and that kind of concierge management or curation of data. So it'll be little niches of high value or places where EHRs haven't penetrated. Maybe it's going to be telemedicine. where instead of
Right.
having to go into a proprietary telemedicine network, physicians are allowed, because we know about the expansion of telemedicine that's happening, despite, a lot of misgivings and issues. And so it could well be that physicians see this as a way of moonlighting without necessarily locking their practice into one particular centralized vendor.
Right. So in that scenario, is there, you're able to identify yourself as in a trusted way as who you say you are, but the data, you still only have access potentially to a subset of this data. Is there an idea of self-sovereign data? You brought up the idea that, the only person I trust with my data is me. How will it work long term? Now we have these data stores that belong to others. Is it really going to move to a model where individuals actually own and control this information in a meaningful way, and it's only them controlling it?
This is why I was in Washington for the beginning of this week. This is what the 21st Century Cures Bill, which looks like it's probably going to pass, and we don't know how that's going to change, the high-tech things. This is what the API task force that ended this summer, that did very good work, went into. And so the best guess I have from the people that I talk to is that it's going to be about a year before the kind of guidance that we need comes out, regulations, if it's based on the current high-tech and HIPAA model. It's not going to happen before the transition, and it's not going to happen right after the transition. But what I'm being told is that the outcome of the API task force work is being worked on very, very hard by the regulators, by ONC. Now, whether or not with the new administration, people take, Congress takes information blocking even more seriously than has been done, and that's a bipartisan bill, and there's an opportunity here for people to, for the regulators, for Washington to step in even more forcefully around information blocking based on 21st Century Cures or maybe something else like it. Then it's going to be longer than a year because, these regulations based on new law takes time. But in the long run, there is no choice because document-based exchange and probabilistic matching is just, nothing is happening there. I mean, you can just see that nothing has happened there. And, I'm involved in, other projects where we're trying to use these systems like Commonwealth, for example, and they're trying to help us. It's not an adversarial relationship, but the stuff is just bog, complex, and insecure, and just random, error-prone, I guess is the way to put it. Not random, but error-prone. Yeah. So it can't be really, it has to be built on top of APIs and the patient right of access.
Great. Yeah, I mean, do you get any sense things are obviously going to change pretty drastically in Washington? On the one hand, the right's always been in favor of individual control. Looks like maybe things are going to be a little less quality-based based on the new leadership at HHS. Any sense about where those kinds of conversations are going?
No, I don't see this at all as a partisan issue. I think I really don't see any element. Patient privacy rights as an organization has never has had equal support from both sides of the aisle. And in a sense, I like to joke, but it's kind of a serious joke. When you talk about self-sovereign technology like HIE of One, to get back to that a little bit, it's not too dissimilar from the gun rights perspective. being able to own your own gun and control that, and then join the militia of your choice with limited ability to be tracked, is really self-sovereign technology, and your ability to work at the family and the community level and the local level, or maybe the virtual level. And HIE of One is got a lot of parallels that I think, and on the left we have the decentralization movement, the Read Decentralized Conference and all the work that I'm sure many of us are involved in. And, there you're seeing people trying to do end-to-end encryption and to control their social media presences. And so I don't think this is the least bit partisan.
Yeah, well, if things worked by logic in Washington, it certainly shouldn't be. Well, thanks. That's about all the time we have. Thanks, Adrian. It's been really enlightening conversation, and you're really on the leading edge of where I think blockchain and patient ownership and patient control are headed. So thanks. Great conversation.